I flunked out of college with straight Fs because I'm slow to understand and I have a bad memory. They let me back in on probation and I flunked out again with straight Fs. They finally let me back in on probation, and one evening I was frantically studying for the test the next day, and I guess God felt sorry for me because I got an idea for a new way to study that I had never heard of. It sounded kind of bizarre, but I was desperate. I tried it, and things started clicking. Went in the next day to take the test, and for a change, I was one of the first to finish. I made 100 on that test, and now I'm excited. But I'm thinking, was that a fluke? Can I do it again? Can I do it in a different subject? The next test was in a different subject, and I made another 100. The next test was in a different subject, and I made another 100. Went on and made a 4-point, got my degree, got another degree, and all the time this was the same guy who was slow to understand with a bad memory. Now I'm thinking, this is too good to keep to myself. There's hundreds of thousands of students and even people who are not students that could benefit from this. You can go onto your search engine and you can put in straight A's, and you're going to get lots of advice on how to make straight A's. But think about it. What good is an A if you don't understand the information? What good is an A if you don't remember the information? I'm not going to tell you how to make straight A's. I'm going to tell you how to understand and remember written information. When you do that, the good grades take care of themselves. So, I wrote a little 20-page pamphlet explaining the method. About a month later, I got a phone call from an instructor at Oklahoma State University. He had been in a car accident, and when he woke up in the hospital, he'd lost his memory. Now, he had been in a profession that required lots of training and lots of experience, and it was all gone. So how's he going to make a living? Well, he had graduated from OSU, which means he was qualified to be a graduate teaching assistant, which paid money, so he applied, and they accepted him. Now, he has to go in and lecture on a subject that he doesn't know anything about. And he had used this method to learn the material himself and then go in and lecture on it. And it was working so well for him that he wanted me to come up and explain the method to his class. Well, I wasn't used to speaking in front of people, but you can't say no to a request like that, so I did. Now, I didn't think there'd be very many people there because it was on a Friday afternoon and that's when students cut class. Plus, it was a holiday weekend. Monday was Labor Day. Plus, it was not a lecture. They were going to be tested over. So, I went up to give the lecture, walked into the classroom. It was packed. People were in every seat, lined up around the walls. Other instructors had come in when they heard what the subject was going to be. And I thought, oh boy. Well, I did the best I could. And afterwards, I looked out looking for a reaction. And there was no reaction. Neutral. No questions. Everybody quietly got up and quietly filed out of the room. And I'm thinking, well, maybe they thought it was silly. Maybe it was something they've already thought of for themselves. This is embarrassing. Let me out of here. Well, shortly after that, I moved to Washington State, and I was asked to give my little lecture on the method to some students at Western Washington University, which I did. And later, I got a note from one of the students. He said, the first time I used your method, he said, I was one of the first to finish. I made 100. He said, and from that point all the way to the end of the semester, I only missed a grand total of 5 more questions on all the rest of the tests, including finals, and made my first 4-point, and it was easy. So now I'm thinking, okay, I got to write a proper book. Now, I didn't know anything about manuscripts and agents and contracts and the publishing industry, so I just found a local printer who let me use their computer to type the book. Now, I had to have a title, and I'm thinking, when you flunk out with straight F's, you can't even call yourself a student. Well, overnight, I became a student. So I named it The Overnight Student. And the first year it came out, it was named Educational Book of the Year by a national Christian magazine. And today, every review on Amazon is 5 stars. Then I got homesick. So I moved back to Oklahoma. Now, one day I got a letter from that instructor at OSU. It had been about 8 years, and I had had no feedback, and I always wondered. In his letter, he said every one of his students came to him and told him that using that method, they had improved their grade point average. He got a phone call from the assistant baseball coach and the assistant track coach, and they both said essentially the same thing. Don't know what you're doing, but keep doing it. All your students are making their grades. He got a phone call from a grandmother. She was in tears. She said, I don't know what you've done with my grandson, but for the first time, he's made his grade and he's staying in school. And he got a letter from a girl who had given up her dream of becoming a doctor because her grades were not good enough for medical school. But using this method, she had improved her grades enough to apply to medical school, which she did, and she was accepted. Then, and this is my favorite, I got a card from Jill White, who was principal at Christian Heritage Academy in Del City, Oklahoma. She wanted to tell me about her friend Debbie. Debbie was scared because as part of her job, she had to take and pass a week-long baking course, and she was scared because she'd never been good at testing. Jill loaned her my book. Debbie quickly read it, applied it, and made the highest grade in the class. Now, that's my favorite story. And there are more testimonies. You can go on Amazon if you want to read more, but I want to tell you how to do this. And I'm going to give you enough of the basics, because we don't have time for all the details here, that you can actually do this without buying the book. When I was back in college, on that second probation, one of my classmates lived at home with her mother. And one evening, I was over at their house, and her mother made the comment that I had learned to hate. She said, "I always made good grades, but I hardly cracked a book." Now, I was tired of hearing people say that. So I swallowed my pride, and I said, "How'd you do that?" She said, "I took notes." Well, I thought about that answer because I took notes, or I took notes when I went to class. I took notes when my mind had wandered off, but I was a pretty haphazard note taker because I got most of my information out of the textbooks. Let me tell you about those textbooks. They're written by people who know their subject, but when you consider the fact that only 6% of people are born with teaching as their major aptitude, that means about 94% of those textbooks are written by people who are not all that good at explaining to somebody else. They'll use a word that's familiar to them, they think it's familiar to you, and you don't know what that means. They'll leave a concept out that's so familiar to them, they think it's familiar to you, and now you're lost. Well, the idea of not having to rely on those textbooks was very appealing to me. I went to every one of my instructors, and I said, "Will you ever test us on material that you have not covered in class?" They all said no. Some of them said, "Of course not." Great, that's just what I wanted to hear. I took my textbooks, and I shoved them up into the upper right-hand corner of my desk, and from that point on, I assumed that there's no such thing as a textbook, and the only information I'm going to get is what that teacher gives me in the classroom and what I write down in my notes. So, here's where I took notes. Here's how I want you to take notes. You go to every class, you're on time, you sit as close to the front as you can, you got your pen ready to start writing when that teacher starts talking. Now, is it better to handwrite your notes or type them on a laptop? We don't have to wonder anymore because enough studies have been done and virtually all of them have shown a significant difference. One of the studies put a skull cap on all the students' heads with 256 brain centers because different parts of your brain do different things. Now, here's the setting. Same teacher, same lecture, same time. The handwriters are handwriting, the typists are typing, and after the lecture, the students are told, "Okay, study your notes, and then we're going to give you a test." They all studied their notes, and they were given a test. The handwriters scored from 12 to 20% higher than the typists. And something they noticed about the typers is that there was very little brain activity. It's like the information was going into their ears, down their arms, out their fingertips, and all they were thinking about was how to spell those words and where to put the fingers on the keys. Muscle memory. Now, the handwriters, they can't write as fast as that teacher can talk. They were forced to listen and analyze what was being said and decide what's worth writing down and what's not worth writing down. I had an instructor in college, and I think he was the head of the department. At the beginning of his lectures, you could look around, and everybody's got their pen ready to start taking notes. We didn't have laptops back then. Just a few minutes into his lecture, look around, everybody's laid their pen down. He's not saying anything worth writing down. He's rambling on about this, that, and the other. Well, one of those researchers told a story about one of his students. She was highly motivated, sat on the front row. He said she was the fastest typist he'd ever seen. Well, one day she came to his office, and she said, "I'm just not getting this stuff." All he told her was, "Start handwriting your notes." She started handwriting her notes. Bingo. Made all the difference in the world. So handwrite your notes. Now, there's a lot of details in the book I don't have time to go into here, but I'm going to tell you the best tip in the book about taking notes. Let's say it's a biology, and let's say it's a zoology course. Okay. Teacher says, "Today we're going to talk about birds," so you write down birds. She said, "The first ones we're going to talk about is going to be the carnivorous birds," so you drop down carnivorous. The first carnivorous birds we're going to talk about is going to be the hawks. You drop down, you write hawks. Showing the relationship of those facts is a big, big help in understanding and remembering the information. Otherwise, you've got a bunch of unrelated facts floating around in your head like alphabet soup. So here you are with your wonderful notes the day before a test, and you're studying your notes. So what's the first thing you do? You stand up. Your mind works from 5 to 20% faster when you stand up. That's too big an advantage not to take advantage of. And you are now one of the small percentage of people on the planet who even know that. Next, take your notes. Now, I like to find something in the room about chest high. Lay your notes down. Now, the book of Isaiah tells us how God teaches. He teaches little by little, line on line, precept on precept. That's how we're going to teach ourselves. Go to your notes, start at the beginning, pick a little bite-sized portion, read that. Now turn around, away from your notes, and out loud. That's very important, out loud. And in your own words, that's very important. We're not memorizing verbatim. You teach an imaginary class what you just read. Why are we doing that? We only remember 14% of what we hear, but we remember 91% of what we teach other people. Every teacher will tell you that the best way to learn something is to teach it. In the book of Romans, the Apostle Paul says, "You then who teach others, do you not teach yourself?" So, here's what's probably going to happen the first time you try this. You're going to think, I can do this. So, you go to your notes, pick the little bite-sized portion, you read that, now you turn around to your imaginary class, and you just can't keep going. And you think, well, what's going on? I just read that. Well, now you'll begin to realize what was happening all those times that you thought you were studying, and all you were doing was pronouncing words in your head, and your mind had wandered off somewhere else. Go back and read it again with the intention of explaining it to your class, because your mind works differently when you read something with the intention of explaining it to somebody else than it does if you're reading it for yourself. So, go back, read it again, and you're thinking, how am I going to explain this? Okay, got it. So you turn around to your class. Now words are coming out. Here's something else that's probably going to happen. Before you get to the end of that bite-sized portion, you're going to forget something. You're going to think, oh, what was that? And you look back, oh, yeah. So you turn back to your class. When that happens, don't start with that thing you forgot, or you'll probably forget it next time too. Start back at the beginning of that bite-sized portion. And you do that until you can go through that bite-sized portion about 2 or 3 times in a row without looking back at your notes. And you pick the next bite-sized portion and do it again. And you continue in that fashion until you get to the end of your notes. Now, along the way, you're going to forget some things. When that happens, you don't have to go back to the beginning of your notes. Just go back to the beginning of that particular bite-sized portion. Now, you know the basics of how to do this without buying the book. Now, in the book, there's lots of little tips. One of the reviews on Amazon says that there are pearls of wisdom on every page. There are a lot of good tips in the book, but we don't have time to go into all of those. But there are 2 good little memory tricks in the book that if you are ever in a position where you have to memorize a long list of items, these memory tricks are simple and they are powerful, and you'll amaze yourself and your friends on how quickly you can remember large lists of information. Now, if you decide, okay, even though I told you you don't have to buy the book, if you decide you want to buy the book or you want to buy it as a gift, here's the book. Now, as you can see, the fellow on the front, he's teaching his imaginary class, and behind him is a bureau with the notes on top of the bureau. And now on your screen, we're going to show you 2 links that you can click to buy the book. And one of them goes to my website, the other goes to the publisher. It doesn't matter which one you pick. And the book is cheap. It's a little paperback book. Now, why does this thing work so well? There's a concept called synergy. Now, here's how synergy works. This guy, working by himself, in 1 hour can produce 1 widget. This guy, working by himself in 1 hour, can produce 1 widget. Working together in 1 hour, they can produce 3 widgets. Their production working together is more than the sum of their individual productions. And what we've done here, we've taken the fact that when you stand up, your mind works 5 to 20% faster, and you remember 91% of what you teach other people, and we put them together. Synergy. powerful. Now, every review, every feedback I have ever gotten has always been positive. I have gotten positive feedback from gifted people who are smarter than I'll ever be, and they say it helped them. Now, if you remember nothing else about what we've talked here, remember these 6 words. Stand up and teach out loud. Stand up and teach out loud. Now, this will work for you because it always works. And when it does, you're going to feel grateful, especially if you've been struggling. There's a verse in James that says, every good gift comes down from the Father above. And any gift that takes me from straight F's to straight A's is a good gift. So now you know who to thank.